We'll look. We just celebrated recently Valentine's Day, a day that we set aside to recognize and celebrate those that we love, especially that one that God has given to us to spend our days with. When He told Adam and Eve, that two shall be one flesh, and we set aside a day to celebrate that, and it's usually a good day unless we have an absence of memory, but that happens, anniversaries and those kinds of things. But we look forward to days like that, Christmas and Thanksgiving, and sharing around the table together. And yet many times what we find is that those can be some of the most stressful times of the year. It's that one day that we are forced to be with, to be civil to someone maybe that is in our family, or maybe that we've married into the family, or whatever it might be. And it can be one of the most difficult times to be with our family, can't it? Some of the most discordant, I don't know what the right word is, family discord happens over the table. We try to stay away from certain topics like what is it, politics and religion. You don't talk about those things. And you might be able to get through the day okay. Maybe we've all experienced that to one degree or another. Hopefully that doesn't characterize all of our holidays, but you do hear of that. You do see that happen. You got to figure out ways to navigate that. Another area where we probably each have seen discord and maybe difficulty in relationships is here in church. I mean, this is a family after all. And if it's true that we have struggles with our, blood family or those we've married into, then it's true that we can have struggles here in church, in this family. In fact, many of us have been in churches that have split, or and then we were probably on one side or the other of whatever that split was. Maybe we stayed in the church and other people left. Maybe we left the church because we just couldn't go along with whatever it was. Hopefully it was something material, something important, something doctrinal. But often we find that church splits occur over all sorts of things, don't we? It can be the famous one is the color of the carpet. The size of the steeple, or whatever it might be. You name it. The name of the church. The whatever it is. Programs. How to do this or that. We have all sorts of causes of discord and division. And this morning we're going to read in Joshua chapter 22, and we're going to see that after all of this time of wandering through the wilderness and the ups and downs, the result of sin, and then coming back to God and following Him, and of seeing God provide, and of seeing God's mighty hand take over, conquer their enemies. And then of this time we saw of Him, dividing up the land to different tribes so that they could have a home. And so the phrase was so that they could be at rest from war. Through all of those things, and yet now, after all that, we're going to see a potential for division. And so the title of the message this morning is Dealing with Division. Let's go ahead and begin reading together, and I'm going to pause as we go through here and comment as we go through, and then we're going to, as we do, kind of back up and try to understand what is really happening. How does this apply to us, and draw conclusions and things that we can take home with us. Verse 1 of Joshua chapter 22. At that time, this is After the division of the land and of the giving of the cities of refuge, and then giving the where the Levites will live, and all of that. At that time, Joshua summoned the Reubenites and the Gadites and the half tribe of Manasseh, and said to them, "You have kept all that Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you, and have obeyed my voice in all that I have commanded you. You have not forsaken your brothers these many days, down to this day, but have been careful to keep the charge of the Lord your God. And now the Lord your God has given rest to your brothers as he promised them. Therefore, turn and go to your tents in the land where your possession lies, which Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you on the other side of the Jordan. Only be careful to observe the commandment and the law that Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you, to love the Lord your God, and to walk in all his ways, and to keep his commandments, and to cling to him, and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul." So Joshua blessed them and sent them away, and they went to their tents. Well, you'll remember that these are the 2.5 tribes that before they crossed the Jordan, and when Moses was saying, "We're going to go across and we're going to conquer this land, and this will be the land that's given to us." And these 2.5 tribes, after they had conquered, Og and what's his name? I can't remember the other king's name, on the east side of the Jordan, and they said, "We like this land. We would like to have this land for our inheritance." And you remember Moses had told them, "Okay, you can have this land as your inheritance, but first, you need to, the men that are warriors, men that are capable of fighting in battle, you need to come across the Jordan with your brothers, with these other 10 tribes, 9.5 tribes, and you need to fight with them against the Canaanites on the west side of the Jordan. And when that's all over and everything, they've conquered the land, and the land has been, divided up, then you can go back." And so here we are. Joshua is saying to them, "Okay, you obeyed what Moses told you. You have kept what I have commanded you. And most importantly, you've been careful to keep the charge of the Lord your God." So really here we have, the beginning of this chapter is really high praise from Joshua. And now you can go back to your families. If you'll remember, it was only the men who came over. It wasn't the women and children. And we haven't paid close attention to the dates as we've gone through here. I mean, there's not a lot of mention of them, but as I understand it, this was probably about a 7-year period after they crossed the Jordan to conquer all of these peoples and then to have the land divided up. And so this was, 5 to 7, who knows, maybe a little bit longer, years. It's a long time to be away from your family, isn't it? Of course, you've trusted God to take care of your family while you were away, and you want to get back home. And so it's not an understatement to say they were very faithful to God's command to remain with their brothers, and not to say, I got a family back here. You guys have this well in control. I'm just going to leave. No, they didn't do that. They stayed. They were faithful. Now we pick it up in verse 7. Now to the 1/2 of the tribe of Manasseh, Moses had given a possession in Bashan, but to the other half, Joshua had given a possession beside their brothers in the land west of the Jordan. And when Joshua sent them away to their homes and blessed them, he said to them, "Go back to your tents with much wealth and with very much livestock, and with silver and gold and bronze and iron, and with much clothing. Divide the spoil of your enemies with your brothers." So the people of Reuben and the people of Gad and the half tribe of Manasseh returned home parting from the people of Israel at Shiloh, which is in the land of Canaan, to go to the land of Gilead, their own land, of which they had possessed themselves by the command of the Lord through Moses. So they were leaving Canaan on the west side of the Jordan and going over back to the east side. And I think it's interesting, this note that the tribe of Manasseh was split in half. And so they had to split the spoils. This was you kind of get this sense of almost, I don't know, sadness or just, you're leaving half of the tribe behind. You're being split. And of course, it was by choice. But they returned home, all, Gad and Reuben and half the tribe of Manasseh, and went back home. Now, sorry, I think I have a wrong passage there, so we'll just skip that and come back to it later maybe. We're going to go ahead and continue reading in verse 10 here. And when they came to the region of the Jordan that is in the land of Canaan, remember the Jordan was the division between the east and the west sides. So here they are still in the land of Canaan, it sounds like anyway. The people of Reuben and the people of Gad and the half tribe of Manasseh built there an altar by the Jordan, an altar of imposing size. And the people of Israel heard it said, Behold, the people of Reuben and the people of Gad and the half tribe of Manasseh have built the altar at the frontier of the land of Canaan, in the region about the Jordan, on the side that belongs to the people of Israel. So it was on the west side, but it was right at the boundary. And when the people of Israel heard it, the whole assembly of the people of Israel gathered at Shiloh to make war against them. This is a very odd thing for us to read after this, great victory that they've had and this great giving of the land, and now the land is at rest and they're going to return home. And they built this large altar, this altar of imposing size. Now I think I have the passage. Okay, so now we want to look back and see what was going on here. And one of the things we see here was back in the law in Deuteronomy, when God had used this phrase repeatedly, that you're not going to worship me as the people of the land did, the Canaanites, or these other peoples. You're not going to worship me like they worshiped their gods. You're going to worship me on, an altar in a place that I choose. He says I'm in the wrong place. Okay. In Deuteronomy chapter 12, he says, he's talking about, in verse 13, well, let's go back to verse 12. And you shall rejoice before the Lord your God, you and your sons and your daughters, your male servants and your female servants, and the Levite that is within your towns, since he has no portion or inheritance with you. Take care that you do not offer burnt offerings at any place you see, but at the place that the Lord will choose in one of your tribes. There you shall offer your burnt offerings, and there you shall do all that I am commanding you. Okay, and he goes on from there and gives the details of, and God goes to great detail of how they can worship him, what they need to do. In verse 18, but you shall eat them before the Lord your God in the place that the Lord your God will choose you and your son and your daughter and your male servant and your female servant and the Levite who is within your towns, and you shall rejoice before the Lord God in all that you undertake. Okay, take care that you do not neglect the Levite as long as you live in the land. But there's this idea of there's a place where God has set aside for them to worship. And we really haven't seen the place set aside yet. But what we see is that these 2.5 tribes have set up this altar. And God didn't tell them to do that. We don't read of any place where God said, set up this altar. And so here are the Israelites, the rest of the Israelites, and they see this happen, and they prepare to make war against them, their own kinsmen, their own fellow nation. Verse 13, then the people of Israel sent to the people of Reuben and the people of Gad and half tribe of Manasseh in the land of Gilead, Phinehas, the son of Eleazar the priest, and with him 10 chiefs, one from each of the tribal families of Israel, every one of them the head of a family among the clans of Israel. And they came to the people of Reuben, the people of Gad, and the people of the half tribe of Manasseh in the land of Gilead. So they sent them across the Jordan to the land of Gilead, and they said to them, thus says the whole congregation of the Lord, what is this breach of faith that you have committed against the God of Israel in turning away this day from following the Lord by building yourselves an altar this day in rebellion against the Lord? Have we not enough of the sin at Peor? Remember last week we studied Baal Peor, the Lord, the Canaanite Lord at Peor, from which even yet we have not cleansed ourselves, and for which there came a plague upon the congregation of the Lord. And it's interesting to note that at Peor, Baal Peor, it was Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, who came and remember he thrust through that one who was disobeying God and through the Canaanite woman that he was with. So he was the one that we saw of the Levites who was zealous, who wanted to preserve holiness. And so he took care of business. Well, here he is, and the people of Israel had sent him along with a chief, a head of family of each of these other tribes. Okay. Got to find where I left off here. Have we not had enough of the sin at Peor, from which even yet we have not cleansed ourselves, and for which there came a plague upon the congregation of the Lord, and that you too must turn away this day from the following of the Lord? Didn't we have enough? And yet you're turning away from the Lord, they said. And if you too rebel against the Lord today, then tomorrow he will be angry with the whole congregation of Israel. And so you can see their concern. Well, if you rebel, then all of us are Israel, and we're going to get punished too. But now, if the land of your possession is unclean, so now they're saying, well, if you're worried about your land being unclean, pass over into the Lord's land, where the Lord's tabernacle stands. Ah, the Lord's tabernacle. That was the portable temple, remember? And take for yourselves a possession among us. If you think your land is unclean, and therefore, instead of building this altar and sinning, come over here and worship God with us, and you can have a possession among us. Only do not rebel against the Lord or make us as rebels by building for yourselves an altar other than the altar of the Lord our God. Did not Achan, the son of Zerah, break faith in the matter of the devoted things. You remember Achan? You remember the battle of Jericho when God had commanded them not to take of the things from Jericho, but to burn them all, and anything that was like silver or gold to give to God as, part of the to the temple. And yet Achan sinned and kept things. And then it says, and wrath fell upon all the congregation of Israel. So all of Israel was punished in that they then lost the first battle at Ai. Then it says, and he did not perish alone for his iniquity. See, Achan was the one who sinned, and yet there were others in his family that also were killed. And so the Israelites here have learned some lessons. These 10 tribes are looking back on some of these lessons they've learned, and well, they should. That's the idea, is that they should see, what they've done and somebody else did even, and the resulting problems, the resulting punishment for sin. And so they should be careful not to allow that to happen again. Well, we go on, verse 21, then the people of Reuben, the people of Gad, and half tribe of Manasseh said in answer to the heads of the families of Israel, the mighty one, God the Lord, the mighty one, God the Lord. They say it twice. This is literally, if the Hebrew literally says Elohim, Yahweh. The mighty one, God the Lord. The mighty one, God the Lord. He knows. And let Israel itself know. If it was in rebellion or in breach of faith against the Lord, do not spare us today for building an altar to turn away from following the Lord. Or if we did so to offer burnt offerings or grain offerings or peace offerings on it, may the Lord himself take vengeance. So now they're agreeing with Israel. If we were really rebelling, and if our intent was to slaughter animals and worship God by using this as an altar, then may God take vengeance. He knows, God knows our hearts. Now, Israel, it's time for you to know our hearts. Verse 24, no, but we did it from fear that in time to come, your children might say to our children, what have you to do with the Lord, the God of Israel? For the Lord has made the Jordan a boundary between us and you. Your descendants are possibly going to see this Jordan here, and are going to look across the Jordan and are going to say to us, to our descendants, what have you to do with the Lord? For the Lord has made the Jordan a boundary between us and you. You people of Reuben and people of Gad, you have no portion in the Lord. So your children might make our children cease to worship the Lord. Therefore we said, let us now build an altar, not for burnt offering nor for sacrifice, but to be a witness between us and you, and between our generations after us, that we do perform the service of the Lord in his presence with our burnt offerings and sacrifices and peace offerings, so your children will not say to our children in time to come, you have no portion with the Lord. And we thought, if this should be said to us or to our descendants in time to come, we should say, behold, the copy of the altar of the Lord. Look at this huge altar that we built, which our fathers made, not for burnt offerings, not for sacrifice, but to be a witness between us and you. Far be it from us that we should rebel against the Lord and turn away this day from following the Lord by building an altar for burnt offering, grain offering, or sacrifice, other than the altar of the Lord our God that stands before his tabernacle. So they said, we weren't building this altar for the purposes of rebelling against God and using it for worship. We were building it as a memorial, as a reminder that we are with you, that we are with God and that he's with us. And so verse 30, when Phinehas the priest and the chiefs of the congregation, the heads of the families of Israel who were with him, heard the words that the people of Reuben and the people of Gad and the people of Manasseh spoke, it was good in their ears. And Phinehas, the son of Eleazar the priest, said to the people of Reuben and the people of Gad and the people of Manasseh, today we know that the Lord is in our midst, because you have not committed this breach of faith against the Lord. Now you have delivered the people of Israel from the hand of the Lord. In other words, because you told us what your true intent was, you've delivered us from going to war against you and then falling vengeance, in God's hands. Then Phinehas, the son of Eleazar the priest, and the chiefs returned from the people of Reuben and the people of Gad in the land of Gilead to the land of Canaan to the people of Israel, and brought back word to them. And the report was good in the eyes of the people of Israel. And the people of Israel blessed God and spoke no more of making war against them to destroy the land where the people of Reuben and the people of Gad were settled. The people of Reuben and the people of Gad called the altar Witness, for they said, it is a witness between us that the Lord is God. I don't know about you, but this isn't a story that I remember hearing in Sunday school. This isn't a very, common thing to look back and, we rehearse the Battle of Jericho. We know about Ai. We know about David and Goliath. We know about Jonah and the great fish. We know all these Bible stories, but this isn't one of them. This isn't one that we remember. And yet, God saw fit to dedicate an entire chapter to this episode of their history. So we have to ask ourselves, why? What is God trying to teach us here today? Now, before I get into all of that, I just want to note some things here. One of the things that we didn't see in this chapter is the Lord, they consulted with the Lord and he told them to build this altar. We don't see that. Throughout the, book of Deuteronomy and Joshua, as Moses led the children of Israel or told the children of Israel about the wandering in the wilderness, and then through Joshua conquering the nations, we often see reference to seeking God's, counsel with God, asking him what to do, or following what he tells them. We don't see that in this chapter. Nor do we see the people of Israel, where God came to the people of Israel and God said, your brothers on the other side of the Jordan have built this altar and I want you to go destroy them. God didn't do that. We don't see God's word plainly given to either side of this situation that develops. I would so therefore we're not given a clear, answer of who was right and who was wrong. If you have kids, you've probably been in that situation where you hear something going on in the other end of the house, and you go in there and there's this anger and this big fight going on, and you're trying to figure out what happened and who was right and who was wrong. And a lot of times you just can't figure out who was right and who was wrong. I mean, basically, both of them were wrong, usually, in one way or another. Somebody said something they shouldn't have said, and then the other one reacted. And you don't know necessarily, and so what do? You usually say, both go sit in the corner. I don't want to hear this yelling. Of course, we don't see God doing that here. But there is this question of, were they wrong to build this altar? I mean, it was an altar. Why wouldn't the people of Israel, the other 10 tribes, have looked at it and said, well, it sure looks like an altar. it quacks like a duck, walks like a duck, must be a duck. You built an altar, you even called it an altar, but you're not going to use it as an altar. So, there's a little bit of confusion going on there. On the other hand, as we didn't really pay a lot of attention, but, initially the people of Israel heard it said that the Reubenites and the Gadites and the tribe of Manasseh had built this altar. And what did they do? We're going to go to war. Now, that's pretty drastic, too. And they didn't hear it said from the Reubenites and the Gadites. This was somebody said, well, they're building an altar. Look at that. We better go, and then kind of gossip. And then pretty soon it gets back to some of the leaders, and all of a sudden we got this big to-do on our hands. I'm not convinced they were wrong to be alarmed, but I think that they probably shouldn't have said, let's get ready to go to war. Fortunately, Phinehas, as the son of Eleazar, so he was a Levite, he was a priest, said, well, let's be careful here. Let's get together some, the leaders of each of the tribes and go over and talk to them. And of course, it turned out okay. We still don't know whether it was good or bad for them to build the altar. God never really tells us that. We don't even see that. We see that there was peace in the end, and they recognized that God was present. We stand in the New Testament era, or present day, and look back at this, I think we see some foreshadowing going on. I'm not going to be dogmatic on this, but I think we see some foreshadowing of, division within maybe the church. And we see a foreshadowing of church discipline. We see, one set of people sees something another set of people is doing that they think is wrong, and they want to take care of it. They want to, basically they wanted to judge it. Well, we know that in Matthew chapter 18, if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. And if he listens to you, you've gained a brother. And in a sense, that's what we see happen here. Now, we did see a big flurry of, we're going to go kill them. We're going to go destroy them because they're obviously sinning. But we see cooler heads prevail. And we see Phinehas and this people, the leaders of the tribes, go over and talk with them. We see things work out. And I think that what we can maybe draw from this is if we see someone that we believe is in sin, we should take some action. Probably not go to war with them. Probably not sentence them to death. We should probably go talk with them. It can be the hardest thing in the world to go talk with a brother or sister that we think has done something wrong. It can be the hardest thing in the world to be the brother or sister and have someone approach you. Because, especially, if you didn't do anything wrong, it's easy to get defensive. And then you look guilty. Well, I think we see this foreshadowing of church discipline. Church discipline, I don't believe, is really intended to be this, get to a point where you got this big problem, and so you have a meeting and you shun someone, you put them out of the. That's not the goal of church discipline. The goal of church discipline is restoring relationship. That's what the goal of church discipline is. It should start in a very small, one-on-one. Go to your brother. Go to your sister. Talk with them. Maybe you're wrong. And in this case, they were wrong about the intent. There wasn't a rebellion going on in these tribes. Go talk with them. Say, well, I don't know what you meant by this. I just want to let you know what it sounded like. I want you to know what it looks like. Maybe nothing's going on, but I want you to know what the world might see when they look at this situation, whatever it might be. And if they listen to you, you've gained your brother. I also think we see this foreshadowing of church division. That Paul spends a lot of time. I remember we went through the book of Ephesians together, and we saw there was a lot of time talking where Paul talked about the unity of the church. The reason he was talking about unity was because we have such a predisposition to division. So many things. It can be the color of the carpet. It can be anything. It can be, who gets selected for a particular position in the church. It can be who's teaching the Bible study. It can be a lot of things. It can be what house it's at. It can be all sorts of different things. We have a predisposition to division. And so this episode really is a foreshadowing of church division that we have to be careful of. And there's a foreshadowing of something else going on here. There's a foreshadowing of accessibility to grace. Now we know that for Israel, God did want them to go to the temple. Later on, it would be built in Jerusalem, and they would go to the temple to worship him. But it wouldn't always be that way. It isn't that way today. In John chapter 4, you remember we went through the book of John together, and we got to that section where Jesus was in Samaria. He intentionally went through Samaria. And his disciples were like, what are you doing? Talking to this woman. Well, he says to her in John chapter 4, verse 21, woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither on this mountain in Samaria nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. But the hour is coming, and now is here, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For the Father is seeking such people to worship him. God is a spirit, and those who worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. Now, that's not really where this episode goes, but we do see this idea. We don't want your descendants to forget that we are part of you. And eventually, they would be able to worship God wherever they were. Well, they could always worship him wherever they were. They just couldn't, do those ceremonial things that was required for them to be at the temple. So I think we see a foreshadowing of accessibility to grace. Well, what do we take away from this morning? Now, I will admit that I had a little bit of help. Sometimes when I'm preparing a sermon, I like to go listen to another sermon. I probably shouldn't do that, but as a lay preacher, sometimes it's really required for me to really get my hands around what's happening. And so I had some help this morning, but it doesn't really matter. I just don't want to always present these as my conclusions. One of the things we need to do as the church, as followers of Jesus, is be watchful for sin. We need to be watchful for sin. Just as these 10 tribes had learned from their recent history, sin has consequences. And so we need to deal with it quickly. And if necessary, severely. Hopefully it won't be necessary to deal with it severely. There is a place for that severity of telling someone you may not participate in worship with us. until you confess your sin. But that is way down the line. That is a last step. And the goal still is restoration. But deal with it quickly. Number 2, be careful not to jump to conclusions. You know, these Israelites heard something, heard it said. They didn't witness it themselves necessarily, but they jumped to a conclusion and they got ready for war. That's not really what we read that we're supposed to do. In 1 Corinthians 13, we read, love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It's not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing. It rejoices in the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. There's this idea that if we love our brother or sister, even if we love our mate, if we love our children, we should not begin at this point of assuming sin. We should begin at this point of maybe there's something I don't understand. It's really where are you coming from when you approach what you think is something wrong in someone else. Sometimes I watch these videos on YouTube, and they're called shorts, and they show someone, planning something for their spouse or their girlfriend, or planning an engagement, a proposal or something, and the other one doesn't know what's going on, and so she sees he's talking to my girlfriend, and so she gets all worked up and assumes what's going to happen. And no, we see this on Hallmark movies, don't we? No, that's not what he was doing. You need to start from a place of assuming that he loves you because he told you he loves you. You need to start from that place. And then if you wonder if there's some problem, then go talk with him about it. Don't begin from the assumption that something is amiss. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, and endures all things. I didn't say that love overlooks sin and tolerates, sin. That's not what that says. Proverbs 15 says, a hot-tempered man stirs up strife, but he who is slow to anger quiets contention. Such an important principle that we can live by. If we react out of a temper, out of a, without even considering maybe we're wrong, it doesn't really matter at that point whether we were right or wrong. Now we've got this relationship that's broken. And it's very difficult then to mend that. You've heard it said, you can't take back a word you've spoken out of their ear and, out of the influence you've had on someone. Maybe you love this person, but you've said something that now you can't take back. You can say, I'm sorry. And as much as we like to, forget what someone has done to us, we really can't do that. But if you're slow to anger, then you can prevent that contention from coming to fruition. So be careful not to jump to conclusions. Number 3, be honest and truthful in your communication. Love rejoices in the truth. We just read in 1 Corinthians. And Paul says in Ephesians 4, rather speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up in every way into him who is the head, into Christ. We are to speak the truth in love. It was necessary for Phinehas and the heads of the tribes to go and talk with the Reubenites and Gadites and find out what happened. Why did you do this? and they were able to resolve it. And number 4, we need to be gentle in our approach. I used to try to teach my kids, I don't know if it worked or not, but you can always make your sibling yell at you. You can always do or say something that causes a fight. You can always do that. It's almost involuntary, the response that you can get. No, we are to be gentle in our approach. You can talk to your brother or sister in a way that is not going to result in a fight. You can even tell them hard and difficult things, and we as a family can do that together. We can communicate in a way that is loving. Paul says, I therefore, a prisoner of the Lord, urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you've been called, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. Eager to maintain unity, bearing with one another in love. Sometimes people do or say things that bother us, but it wasn't a matter of sin. It was just something we have to put up with. We might not like that, but it's not a matter of sin. But it can cause us, if we are not being gentle in our approach, it can cause us to get into those, contentious battles that result in division. And then later on, 20, 30 years down the road, we can have difficulty sitting across a Thanksgiving dinner together, being thankful for what God's given to us, because we still have this contention over something that was just a word from decades before. We need to be gentle in our approach with all humility and gentleness. Those two words are so important together, humility and gentleness. With patience, putting up with one another in love, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit. Well, this was kind of a little bit different of a sermon, of a chapter maybe, and yet God thought that it was important enough for us to understand how can we get along, how can we avoid this division that is so easy. Division is easy. Unity is hard. Unity is one of those things that we actually have to work at. If we don't work at unity, what will we have? We will have division. That's one of the problems with so many marriages today, with so many churches too. Well, may we, as a church, be eager to maintain unity together, and even with our sister churches, with our family, with our loved ones. May we be eager to maintain unity and be watchful for sin, careful not to jump to conclusions, being honest and truthful in our communication, and gentle in our approach. Let's go before the throne together.